Thanks for the Memories is an anomaly. On one hand, it's a touching story about grief and learning to say goodbye to a loved one. On the other hand, the journey to that moral involves poor implications, strange choices, leaps in logic, extreme actions, and so on. If you couldn't tell, this is an episode featuring themes of death and a show we are not allowed to say the death word.
My friends could have been smashed to pieces, nearly demolished my friends, nearly took out my friends.
So instead of being a story about losing a loved one, it's now a story about allowing a beloved pet to hibernate. And based on that description, you can see why the death and grief metaphor isn't really that strong. Because for one, Tank here isn't going to be gone for good or even for that long. And two, part of the moral of the episode is that Rainbow Dash is supposed to let Tank hibernate. So if hibernation is supposed to be a metaphor for death, then that's pretty screwed up. Obviously, the reality of the episode's themes will become apparent as we go along. So let's embark, shall we? The episode begins with Rainbow Dash, who's very excited to hang out with Tank over the winter.
Our first winter together!
Yup, we're not even a minute in and there's already a plot hole. Assuming that every episode of the show takes place after the one before it, Rainbow should have already had at least one winter with Tank, because Rainbow got Tank in the episode May the Best Pet Win, but then 4 episodes later, Hearthwarming Eve came out, which takes place in the winter. So unless this is some kind of non-chronological timeline, this whole plot about Tank needing to hibernate for the winter should have already happened.
Oops.
Though I think I can give this some leeway since the show has a history with getting its seasons straight. Speaking of seasons, it's supposed to be near the beginning of winter when Dash notices that Tank is acting drowsier than usual. However, according to Arizona Exotic Animal Hospital, tortoises tend to start slowing their movements like that near the beginning of fall, not winter. So why is this just happening now when winter is literally hours away and not 2 months prior? Well, the site also states that tortoises start being less active once ground temperatures drop below 60, so maybe it was just really warm that season? I don't know. Regardless, Rainbow brings Tank to Fluttershy for her take on the matter, where she informs Rainbow that Tank looks tired because he's preparing to hibernate for winter, which Rainbow, in her ignorance, doesn't believe. I mean, you'd think it would be a no-brainer that they do since cold-blooded animals like tortoises can't survive in the winter, but there are actually some tortoises that hibernate and some that don't. Now, Tank isn't actually based on one type of tortoise, and its design is actually kind of vague and non-specific, so we can't really determine whether his species would be one to hibernate or not. Even so, Rainbow still insists that Tank doesn't need to hibernate despite not knowing Tank's species, besides tortoise, or giving an alternative reason for his drowsiness. And so she storms off.
Where are you going? To get a second opinion from a real reptile expert.
Oh, Rainbow, you and your racism. She tries in vain to get Spike to tell her what she wants to hear, and when he doesn't, she storms off again. They're all crazy. Who needs their facts and evidence? I know what's best for my pet, and so she goes on with her day, pretending as though nothing is wrong until she ultimately blows up at her friends out of nowhere.
Who said anything about anger? I didn't say anything about anger. I'm not upset, and I am not angry. Do I look angry?
Alright, I say it's about time to address the elephant in the room. You may have noticed by now, but this episode uses the 5 stages of grief to structure its story. We just saw denial, this is anger, and we're about to get to bargaining, followed by depression and acceptance. The 5 stages of grief have become a standard format for stories about loss. However, many stories that use it, including this one, use it as a crutch, as they often include it first and then write the story around it. It's like a guide to writing loss for people who have never written loss before. You can't just put the human psyche in a box and assume that when X happens, A, B, C, D, and E will happen in that order as a result. According to this article from Psychology Today on the subject, quote, even Kubler-Ross, who coined the 5 stages of grief, said that grief doesn't proceed in a linear and predictable fashion, writing toward the end of her career that she regretted her stages had been misunderstood. Also in this article, it says that the 5 stages of grief were originally written to describe the process of coming to terms with being terminally ill, and it wasn't applied to grieving loved ones until later. Its origins are kind of similar to the hero's journey, another writing trope which was initially an observation about stories with similar structures that was then retooled into a storytelling template. And that's all the 5 stages of grief are really seen as, a template. Yes, using clever writing, you can incorporate the 5 stages of grief into your story and make it seem natural. But, just having them there doesn't automatically make it better or more deep. For example, in this episode, they try really hard to hammer in the fact that Dash is grieving by making every stage extremely extremely obvious and easy to point out. Oh look, Rainbow is in denial to the point that she doesn't trust a real book, an animal expert, who is the one she adopted Tank from, by the way, and the very real symptoms showing Tank's need to hibernate. And then that's followed up by the angry scene, which is just so over the top and only exists to establish that Rainbow Dash is angry. Like, so angry, it's very subtle, you probably didn't even notice. And you can tell that the plot is just following the guidelines of the 5 stages of grief and not actually trying to make the grieving process seem natural. Why is Dash angry in this scene? Because this is the scene where Dash is supposed to be angry. We can't just skip to bargaining, that would mess with the formula. And if the episode's moral really is about learning how to handle the loss of a loved one, then it's either saying that grief makes you mean and stupid like Rainbow in the episode, or that there's only one way to handle loss and that during the whole grieving process you should just be aiming to reach the acceptance stage. And if this is in fact the case, then using the 5 stages of grief actively shoots this moral in the foot. Grief doesn't always play out this way, and saying that it does is not good. Here's the article again. Many people wind up criticizing themselves for not doing grief right. When people buy into the idea that there's only one healthy way to grieve, then it's easy for them to attack themselves when they naturally find that they're doing it differently. This kind of self-criticism never helps anyone. If the takeaway here really is that this is how you're supposed to handle grief, then this episode is more messed up than I initially thought. Anyway, Rainbow and Tank go back to their house, where Dash gets an idea. An awful idea. Rainbow Dash gets a stupid, terrible, awful idea.
I'll just have to stop winter!
Gosh, your brain really is full of spiders. Here's a bright idea. If Tank is only trying to hibernate because it's cold, then why not just find a way to keep him warm instead of trying to stop the cold entirely? Why wreck everyone else's schedules, plans, hard work, etc.? Actually, come to think of it, you ever wonder why Equestria does winter in the first place? In the real world, we have to deal with it because it's an unstoppable force of nature, but in this world, the weather, and by extension the seasons, are almost completely controlled and artificial. They make snow clouds in a factory, they have volunteers empty those snow clouds, they prepare all the residents and animals for it, and then they basically undo all that hard work when it's time for spring. Why? It can't just be because winter activities are fun. Because of winter, food can't be grown, it's colder and harder to live in, and everyone has to go through the hassle of migrating the birds and hibernating the animals, including their own pets for the duration of the season. And then when it's time for spring, everyone has to manually clean up the snow, get rid of the clouds, wake up the animals, find the migrated birds and lead them back, break the ice and plant seeds. Is all this hassle really necessary? Maybe if they just didn't do winter in the first place, then Rainbow wouldn't be having this crisis right now. Speaking of whom, there's a song. It's okay. I don't like it, I don't dislike it. It mostly just reinforces what we already know as it shows Rainbow's futile attempts at stopping winter. Though that's not to say this sequence isn't without issue. Whoa, what the heck? Why are you putting icicles up? Those things are dangerous, you know? If you're in complete control of what winter is like, then wouldn't you want to cut out all the hazards? What the? How does redirecting the migrating birds stop the cold? Why did you do that? That was a dick move, Rainbow. Hey, wait a minute. If that's all you needed to do to wake Tank up, and the clouds are only blocking the sun, why not just go above the clouds? You're a Pegasus, and I presume your house is mobile. Heck, Cloudsdale is mobile, and that's a huge city. Why not just move somewhere that's warm instead of ruining everyone else's good time? Or better yet, just construct some kind of heater for Tank so that he won't sense the cold and become tired. You know, Spike, he can help you with that. You have a million options for how to go about this, yet you're still going with the worst possible one. However, even if you were able to figure something out, it would still be fruitless, because according to Arizona Hospital again, a tortoise could become ill if not allowed to hibernate year after year. So if Rainbow had actually succeeded in preventing Tank's hibernation, and then tried the same stunt the next time, she could have actually lost Tank for real in her selfish pursuit.
I know it's wrong, but what does it matter?
So Rainbow knows what she's doing is wrong, yet is doing it anyway for a perceived noble reason? Ah, I see. So it would appear to be another classic case of the ends justify the means. It doesn't matter what happens to everyone else as long as the end result is convenient for me. Luckily, Dash's delusions are cut short when she realizes that her efforts thus far have meant literally nothing.
For every hoof step back, they go 3 hoof steps forward. What am I gonna do?
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
And so, because of the failure of her dumb plan, Rainbow decides that the only way to stop winter is to go to the source. So she infiltrates the weather factory. Pretty easily, I might add. What the? How did you do that? I don't see any tools on you. Maybe her love for Tank was just so strong that she was able to will the screws loose. Then within 10 seconds of entering the building, she finds the weather room, then ponders about how she's going to stop winter. And at this point, I have to ask how long Rainbow thinks she can keep this up. The factory can't be busted forever, or even for the duration of winter. And if it's time for winter and then it doesn't happen, no one will just not notice. And I know I just talked about how highly unnecessary winter seems in this universe, but if there actually is some very good reason to have it every year that I'm not seeing, then it's impossible to justify sabotaging the factory. But Rainbow is sad. Not an excuse. Could you imagine trying to pull that in court? Court is now in session. How do you plead? Well, you see, I was just very depressed. Well, I've heard enough. Then Rainbow Dash starts snooping around the room for a way to stop the snow.
Wait here.
Oh, come on, is that really the only place you could have put him? There are railings right there. Nah, this little microscope will hold my half-awake 100-pound tortoise.
I hate to do this to those weather ponies, but desperate times call for desperate measures.
You'd think upon saying that, Rainbow would have some sort of epiphany about how selfish she's being, while ignoring what's good for everyone else, including Tank. But no, she's completely oblivious, both to her own morals and to Tank, who accidentally flips a switch and starts a chain reaction leading to the factory suffering tremendous damages. See? It's not Rainbow's fault. Tank's the one that caused the weather factory to break. But she's the one who brought him there and left him unattended while doing her own mischief. I didn't burn down that building, I was only trying to smash the walls open, honest. Though I will admit, this isn't entirely Rainbow's fault, because apparently there's nothing stopping someone from accidentally opening the wind door, and if those jars of lightning are that unstable, then why the heck are they in jars on shelves and not secure containers? And the lightning room is so close to the weather stuff too. This place should have been shut down years ago.
Prepare yourselves, every pony. Winter is coming.
I'm cold.
So essentially what Rainbow's done is clog up the cloud dispenser, causing all the snow to fall at once. Let me repeat that. All the snow is falling down at once! That's like if an avalanche fell from the sky, or if a nuke was made of snow. I don't know if you've ever been in an avalanche before. Hopefully you haven't, but it's not just getting stuck under a little snow, as most cartoons portray it as. According to National Geographic, after a serious avalanche, once the snow sets, it's as thick as concrete. So if you get stuck under the snow, moving, let alone poking your head out from underneath, would be nearly impossible. But what if it was just one of those low-tier avalanches? That can't be possible. The snow bomb covers the entire town in seconds. 7 seconds to be exact. So it would be fair to say that the snow is going extremely fast, clearing houses in no time. Come on, it can't be going that fast. Could it? Okay, let's find out. So avalanches can supposedly reach speeds of 80 miles per hour after 5 seconds. The blast here occurs instantly after an impact, so we can just ignore the 5 seconds part. If we divide 80 by 3600, we get 0.022 repeating miles per second. Then multiply that by 7 seconds to get 0.155 repeating miles that would be cleared in that amount of time. And since the explosion is happening at the center, that would make this the radius, so we'd have to double it to get a diameter of 0.31. And keep in mind that the blast covers the entire town in 7 seconds, meaning the speed of the wave depends on Ponyville's size. So if it's anywhere above 0.31 miles in diameter, then we have a very serious disaster on our hands, people. Now, a town in real life has never been hit by an avalanche before that I know of, which is a good thing, I guess, though it wouldn't be too hard to imagine what would happen if a wave of over 80-mile-per-hour snow actually rampaged through a town. As the snow crashes through the streets, it would trample over civilians, tables, carriages, and utilities alike, injuring, damaging, and burying them. As it goes on, it collects debris and rocks, making the wave even more dangerous than it already was. When colliding with houses, it would either severely damage the walls or at least put incredible stress on them. And even if the houses are fine after this, any animal burrows used for hibernation would be completely destroyed, and at the very least the houses would be snowed in. And worst of all, anyone caught under the snow would likely be unable to free themselves, thus requiring them to wait for rescue, creating a large-scale local crisis. However, forget everything I just said, because after the fog clears, the town is covered in snow as well as showing no signs of damage. What? So if the giant snowball wasn't actually dangerous in the first place, then why Oh why did the episode go to such lengths to make it look like as much of a disaster as possible? Rainbow fears the worst when attempting to escape from the weather room, the staff tries desperately to manage the situation, the citizens on the ground panic and try to run, and a literal mushroom cloud forms over the explosion as snow sweeps over the entire town. So it really wouldn't be too much of a stretch to expect this to have had more consequences. And if launching all the snow into town at once really isn't all that dangerous, then why do they make the snow come down in flakes? Producing clouds and then manually emptying them out sounds like a huge waste of time and resources if dumping all the snow out at once is a viable option. That'd be like if you wanted to pour some water into a glass, but instead of just doing that, you got a dropper and did it one drop at a time. If the only negative outcome is everyone getting a little disoriented, then what is the risk? I don't understand. But whatever, let's just move on. So after the snow settles, everyone turns out to be fine, including Rainbow and Tank, who don't have the Weather Factory uniforms on anymore. Which is unfortunate, because if they still had them on, then they could be placed at the scene of the crime. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Rainbow totally gets away with wrecking the Weather Factory. There were no witnesses, nobody saw her go in, she disposed of the uniforms she stole somehow, the Weather Factory's security is crap, and Rainbow was found under the snow along with everyone else, so they could just assume that she was there the whole time. It's the perfect crime. Though Rainbow didn't actually achieve her goal, so she goes home, depressed and defeated. It still bothers me that she essentially blew up a building and buried a town and got off scot-free, but whatever, I guess. We got a template to follow. And no story featuring grief as a main theme is complete without a depression scene, where the grieving character is sad. So sad. Oh man, look at how sad they are. But this is supposed to be a fun show, so Rainbow's friends try to cheer her up.
Rainbow Dash, your winter is going to be petless.
Except Fluttershy is just a total boss. I understand that having Dash face criminal law for busting up the factory would have slowed the episode down considerably, not to mention there's no time, so I'm totally on board with this as a compromise.
It's okay. Tank will come back in a few months.
Months?
Yes, 4 to 6 months. It's actually closer to 2 to 4 months since Tank is being hibernated so late, but I don't care. Anyway, then there's an extended scene of crying. Fluttershy is crying to comfort Rainbow Dash, and then Rarity and Pinkie are crying because Fluttershy is crying, and Twilight has no idea what's even going on. Anyway, Rainbow gets over her grief, and now everyone is outside for winter fun. Hey, how come we don't mess up winter every year? Sending all that snow down at once was very efficient, and I don't think Dash could handle going through that again. Yeah, riding that giant snowball that hit Ponyville was pretty terrifying. Wait, come again? Well, what? Nothing. I didn't bust into the Weather Factory. Why would you assume that? I was talking about Tank. Yes! Tank's hibernation. Let's get to that. And so Rainbow Dodge the Question Dash finally allows Tank to hibernate, bringing the episode to an end. And the moral of the story is... well, all the themes relate to grief, but in the context of a moral, it's really more about the importance of hibernating your pet. Rainbow was stubborn about something at the beginning, but then learned to accept its nature and benefits by the end. And the only thing that fits that bill in this episode is Tank's hibernation. So the moral that I've gleaned from all this is that even though it may be tough to say goodbye, allowing your pet to hibernate is ultimately good for them and should not be feared or vilified. Take it or leave it, learning to accept the loss of a loved one isn't actually a moral. Sure, it may be a theme, but morals consist of either lessons or advice, which this is neither one. Sorry man, better luck next time. Overall, I can see what they were going for. They wanted to do an episode that uses grief as a theme to showcase how tough it can be to say goodbye. And contrary to what a lot of people are saying about this episode, while grief is a theme, this episode is not about grief. Just like how Groundhog Day is not about grief, and how Morty Night Run is not about the hero's journey. And ironically, boiling an episode down to its themes actually completely misses the point of having them there in the first place. What matters is what the episode does with those themes, not the themes themselves. And essentially what happened here is that Rainbow was acting completely irrationally the whole episode while trying to pass off his grieving. They obviously wanted you to sympathize with Rainbow by the time she was in her bed sulking, but after being intentionally destructive, failing to consider alternative solutions, and nearly destroying her hometown, my sympathy for her had already been long gone at that point. Not helped by the fact that she only allowed Tank to hibernate because preventing him from doing so was too hard, and not because she actually realized the benefits of letting him do it. 1 month from now, it'll be about the time when some of you watching at home will have to hibernate your pets. Yes, it can be hard to say goodbye, but it's good for them. And if you'd like to learn more about hibernation, specifically tortoise hibernation, I've linked some further reading in the description. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Don't blow up your local water treatment plant. It's a total dick move.
Am I so wrong to wish that they would?